Hi guys, welcome back to another video, and in today's video we're going to be talking about limerence versus love. And today we are going to be identifying the problems, the issues, and how limerence could possibly be showing up in your life. I'm kind of gonna give you guys real life examples, how I was able to identify limerence in my own personal life, and just dive deep into the science and wonders of limerence. If you have not watched part 1 and 2 of this series that we're doing, I believe this is the third to last to our limerence series. So the last video for this series is going to be next week. The past 2 videos that I did, we talked about what limerence is. So I went to like a deep dive into like what limerence actually is versus love. And on the second video, which was last week's episode, I talked about why you could be experiencing limerence. So those videos are very essential for you to kind of go in and just make sure you watch it before you watch this one, because this is like a part 3 of what limerence looks like in your actual life and how it can be showing up in your relationships. But outside of that, let's get right into today's video. The first thing I want to like hit first before we get into anything is last week I talked about why we could possibly be experiencing limerence, right? Limerence could be showing up in our life because maybe it has something to do with how we grew up, right? Perhaps we have some abandonment issues, parents not present when we were children, daddy issues, mommy issues, etc., etc. If we have these, or rejection issues, all these things are key factor players for how limerence could possibly be showing up in our adult life. And we won't know it until obviously much later, once we actually start experiencing it, right? So I want to talk about attachment, because I think attachment is a very, very big part of limerence, because it is the very reason that makes it very difficult for you to like overcome limerence, right? So today, because we're talking about the science of limerence, and next week, as we are going to wrap up this series of limerence versus love, I'm going to be talking about how we can overcome it. So I just want to give you this idea before we dive deep into the science of limerence in our lives. Attachment is a big part, because it is the very reason why it becomes very difficult for us to let go of, the person that we're with. It kind of amplifies, the whole thing of like having a hard time letting the person go, or just kind of the whole obsession thing and the whole like being extremely attached to someone. Attachment is also connected to, whether that's validation, security, or whatever it is that we're getting from the person. It is why it makes it very difficult for us to detach from that and let that person go and overcome limerence later, right? And so that's a very important thing to understand, because if you're anxious attachment, all these things, these are things that you need to really be aware of and kind of dive deep into your personal, your own attachment. And you need to understand that, because it will give you an idea of why it's even harder for you to let go, because the deep root behind limerence and why you're experiencing it, in addition to why it's difficult for you to overcome it, has a lot to do with your attachment style and how you're attached to the person. So that's the first thing we need to make sure that we get and we understand, because it is the very thing that will ultimately help you later overcome it, right? So that's one thing that I wanted to hit on, because I feel like I didn't really talk about it last week. But again, last week when we talked about why, I did mention how these things are very much the cause of it is because of like our childhood and whatever we experience as children that ultimately manifests later in our adulthood. So that is a very important thing to understand if we are trying to overcome limerence. But again, something to be very much aware of is attachment, and maybe I'll talk more about that next week when I talk about how to overcome limerence. So far we've talked about what limerence is and why we're experiencing it, but I want to talk about today how do we identify whether what we're experiencing is actually love or limerence, and just kind of go deep into how that all plays out, because I think that's very important. Because for me personally, I was very blind. I almost kind of was just like willy-nilly out here, you know, not being aware of this at all, and I didn't even know that I was experiencing it. And once I identified what limerence is and I understood why for me it was happening, I then was like, oh, I can see the pattern. Oh, I can even see like what I've done in the past as far as like the kind of movies or like stuff like that, ideas that I've, you know, come to believe in my adulthood, that I am experiencing it in this way right now because of these are the ideas that I believed in. These are the ways that I have come up, you know, growing up, whatever the case may be. And it makes sense why it's kind of unfolding in this way that it is. The number one thing is, I feel like we often are so engulfed in, like, you know, kind of deep into what we're feeling, right? In limerence, when we are experiencing it, we're so focused on like how this thing is making us feel what we're feeling. So for me personally, it was always about that. Like I didn't even know that is what it was about. But for me, I was like, oh my gosh, this makes me feel good. Like it feels good. It's almost like, you know, a crush, right? When you have a crush on someone in the beginning, it's so beautiful and so fun, and you're like, oh my gosh, we're flirting, this, that, and the next, and it's so fun. It's so fun, you know? But that thing hasn't materialized into a real relationship, and it's not real. So limerence is basically having a crush on someone on steroids, because yes, you have a crush on someone, but it's like amplified 10 times worse than, you know, just a regular crush. And not only that, a crush can turn into love. Limerence can't, you know, it just can't. It cannot. Because, you know, you're fantasizing things in your head. Now, that might confuse someone when I say that, but it's because just think of like a crush, you know? A crush is like, unless it turns into a relationship and it becomes love, which it can, it's kind of weird to just have a crush on someone and it doesn't happen, nothing happens, right? And which, in that case, a crush can happen in that way too. You can have a crush on someone and maybe nothing will happen. So limerence is very similar to that kind of way of having a crush on someone, to the point where nothing happens, which will never happen. You think it's going to happen, but nothing will happen. Again, we talked about last week why uncertainty is a huge, you know, sort of trigger for limerence, because it just makes it thrive even more whenever there's uncertainty and you're not really sure how the relationship was going to work, or, you know, all these things are different factors that are kind of unknown. It makes it even more, and it's like a drug. You almost want to get more of it and you can't stop getting it. So think of it like that. But before I get off topic, we often focus more on the feeling it's giving us. It's like, oh my gosh, this feels amazing. It's like basically this person is just meeting all the needs of, you know, whatever it is that you're getting from them, which we talked about last week as well. Whether that's security, validation, you know, they're making you feel less lonely, whatever, right? So instead of focusing on the feeling, right, we need to focus more on what is this feeling built on. This is very important for us to understand in order to identify what it is that we're experiencing, whether it's limerence or versus love. And the huge topic in this, when it comes to distinguishing the two and what it is that you're experiencing, is you need to identify fantasy versus reality. We have to absolutely get this locked down, because are you experiencing a fantasy, or is this the reality of the matter of the situation? Let's look at fantasy versus reality. So the best way to look at this, when we were looking at the limerence side of things, is you're asking yourself, is this based off of the idea of someone? Like, do I actually love this person for who they really are, which would be the reality if we're looking at the love side of things, But if we're looking at it from a Limerence point, we need to be questioning, do I actually like this person? Or is this a made-up thing in my mind that has come down to me just being obsessed with the idea of who this person is, who they could become, who I want them to be, but it's not reality. So the reality side of it would be, which would be the love, right? You actually like this person, it's not, you're not making up, you're not filling in the blank, you're not making up things. This is what it is. Like, it's in front of you, you're getting it, certain things actually align, like your values align with this person. There is a possibility of a real relationship. And I'm not talking about just like, whatever. It's like there's something that we can actually build this relationship on. For example, God is at the center of this relationship, so therefore there's an opportunity for this relationship to grow and prosper into something. That is a good reality to build on. Versus this person doesn't have God in their life, but you're hoping that they would, eventually have a relationship with God. You're hoping that eventually, but when you met them, they never knew God. They didn't have a relationship with him. So what is the reality of the matter in this? This person does not have God in their life. Now, they could have God in their life later. They could have but the reality of the matter is that right now, when you met them for who they are in the beginning, that was not the case for them. And a lot of the time we'll be like, oh, we want to change the person, we want to do this. But then again, that's limerence, because you're building off of the idea of what it could become, which it's not what it is. So the reality would be that they do have God in their life. And when you met them, there's a lot of other values, things like that align, that would make sense for you guys to build a relationship off of. So that's kind of the picture of when we're distinguishing fantasy versus reality, is we're looking at it from Limerence point, asking these questions of, am I building off of an idea of someone? Am I obsessed with the idea of someone? Versus love would be asking, oh, do I actually like this person, and I'm building off of a reality that I'm seeing the person that I'm getting right in front of me. Now that we have an idea of like, okay, we need to be obviously basing this off of reality and not what we hope for it to be. And this is very hard, because when you're attached to somebody and you actually really, really like someone and you really want this to work out, you're like, reality, forget reality. Like, I just want to be with this person. Who cares about what? It's so insane, because that's exactly what limerence is, It's almost like you don't really care for the reality of the situation. You don't care what's happening in front of you. You don't care. You will ignore every single red flag. You will just ignore whatever is negative that you're seeing, and you're willing to just be blind to everything that you're seeing in front of you that isn't going to work in this relationship, when you know it isn't going to work for you with this person. You are going to just be so blind, because you're, again, you're getting these things of validation, security, all these things that you're seeking from this person, which you should never be seeking. Only God can provide that, right? You will just be blind, and you'll go right in. Blind, don't care, as long as you're feeling good. We need to be asking about, like, limerence is obsession. That's what it is. And so we need to distinguish obsession versus stability, because when you're obsessed with someone, it's almost like you're chasing this high. It's like you'll get a hit, you'll keep going for it, you'll get a hit again, keep going for it, and you can't stop getting the high that you're getting from this person. And you can get this highs from their attention. How you get their attention, and when they stop giving you the attention, of course the high will go low, and then they give you the attention again, you're getting that high again. So it becomes a thing of like, their attention basically controls your emotions, right? They text you, they're giving you your attention, your emotion, you're on a high. When they don't respond to you, they're not texting you, whatever the case may be, then you're on a low again. So you overthink things, you analyze and constantly wonder where you stand with this person. So whether that's like, someone treating you like really horribly, like this person doesn't even text you, whatever the case may be, you don't know where you stand with this person, or you are the one who's in control, let's say, in this relationship or this situationship or this person that you're pursuing, let's say. But at the same time, it's like your emotions are still being controlled by, again, that validation thing. It's the validation thing, you know? So in limerence, I think it's often going to be like that. It's like chasing a high that will never, it's never going to end. It's never ending, and it's very unhealthy, and frankly, it's very exhausting. So I don't know who would want to live like that, but it's definitely not a nice life to live. In love, you care deeply about the person. You obviously want to spend time with them and be with them, but I think you don't lose yourself in the person. And I think that's a big distinguisher. In limerence, you ultimately kind of lose yourself, and you don't have autonomy over yourself, and you don't really have control over how your emotions are being triggered and how you're reacting to things. It's more like, again, your life completely becomes about them, and like you're lost in them, with them, and I don't know, like you just lose yourself almost. And I don't think that that's what happens in love. I think there's room for peace, and there's room for independency, and there's room for you to be kind of stable. And I'm not saying that in love everything is going to be perfect. I'm not saying that, you know, there isn't going to be conflicts, but I do think there's this sense of peace and stability that comes with love, versus in limerence, you're just in this constant dopamine hit, like getting that hit again and again and again, and it's just like it will never stop, because it's like limerence. You will know because you're getting that hit, and it's like you can see the mood changes in yourself, and you know whether that person is controlling your emotions or not. Some people are in such like toxic relationships and just seeking that, again, need that needs to be met for them, which is what we talked about last week when we talked about the why, that they ignore all of these things. They don't really even realize like how much chaos there is in the relationship, and how much they're seeking out to the other person, and what they're seeking out from the other person. So a good way to distinguish it is, I just think in love, you're not going to be losing yourself in someone, you know. Your life doesn't become like overtaken. You can still go do your day-to-day activities, you can go do things, and in limerence sometimes you can do that, sometimes you can, but 90% of the time you won't be able to do that. You're just thinking about them, you want to be with them, you want to do things with them, you're overthinking things, you're analyzing things. It just becomes a thing. It's just very unhealthy, and it becomes overwhelming. It just becomes overwhelming. And again, I talk a lot about this, how you need to have peace. You need to have a peace in a relationship with someone. When I don't care, this could even be for friendship, family, like if you don't have peace in the relationships that you're in, what are you doing? So we talked about fantasy versus reality in limerence and in love, which is, are we basing it off of the person who that person could become and who we want them to be, and the idea of them, we're obsessing over that, or are we actually basing it off of reality and what we're getting and the potential of the relationship and where it could go? And we also talked about obsession versus, you know, stability, which is an obsession, you're constantly just triggered, anxiety, dopamine hit, and you're just getting that hit and that high, versus stability would be you experience that peace and you're riding that wave, and you're kind of experiencing, you know, a very steady and healthy and just, I don't know, peaceful relationship with this person that you're interested in. The last thing I want to talk about is validation versus genuine care, right? So in limerence, you may be attached to how they make you feel. What did I say when I talked about this last week on why we experience limerence? When we want to know if we're experiencing limerence versus love, this is a very huge one for me. You have to really focus on and pay attention to if you are just obsessing over basically your attachment to how they're making you feel, which could be they're making you feel at ease. They're making you feel chosen. They're making you feel wanted. They're making you feel attractive. They're making you feel worthy. They're filling that gap and that thing that you're going to them to fill the void, right? We talked about this last week, and if you have not watched last week's video, what are you doing? What are you doing? You need to go watch it. But make sure you guys are commenting too, because I need to know if these videos are helping you. Please let me know. I'm putting myself out there pretty much. So you guys have to let me know. Are you obsessing and are you attached to how they're making you feel? And these are all the different feelings that someone could possibly making you feel. And that is kind of how you know if you are chasing that validation. Versus in love, you genuinely see and care about them. So it becomes more about them, and there's a healthy balance of, of course, how they make you feel as well, but not only what they provide for you emotionally. So you're not just focused on emotionally what they're providing for you, but you're also just focused on them and who they are as a person, and you genuinely actually are curious about who they are. Because I think in Limerence, yes, there could be that too, but majority of it is driven by you focusing on what they're providing for you. And you might not even know that you're doing that, but naturally, when you're in a limerence relationship or you're limerent towards somebody, you're focused on how they're making you feel versus you actually being interested in them as a person. So again, the idea of somebody, you chasing that high, you focusing on the attachment and what it is that they're making you feel. These are all very much limerence behaviors that you're doing that you can obviously identify whether you're actually in love with someone or you're limerent toward them. And listen, in limerence, I've talked about this many times and I'm going to say it again, there is a possibility of you actually really being in love with someone. You actually love them. But again, if you're in limerence with someone or you're limerent toward them, it cannot be love. It just can't. There's a possibility. I always say that there's different kind of love, that we can give out to people. There's the love of, friendships, there's the love of family, there's the love of parents to their children to their parents, whatever. There's different kinds of love. And, of course, when you're in a limerence relationship or you're limerent towards someone, there's definitely some kind of interest that you have with them. And, of course, you love them, it's just not healthy, because limerence very much feels like love. It does, but it's not, right? It feels like love, but it's not. But it is possible to love somebody but also experience limerence towards them. So that's why you have to distinguish if you're experiencing love or limerence, because it's not like it's the end of the world that you're experiencing limerence, right? I don't think it's that. I think it's unhealthy to constantly be in limerence relationships and constantly be limerent towards someone and constantly confuse limerence for love, which is what we're talking about, right? We're talking about limerence versus love. But we have to absolutely distinguish and try to understand how to ultimately separate the two, because we need to understand what genuine love is and how to be in a healthy relationship, how to approach those things versus experiencing, attachment, fantasy, validation, obsession, all these things. These things are not love. They're not. They're simply just a very distorted, image of what we think love is, but it's not. So that's why I think, yes, because you might sit there and be like, I think I loved this person, but I also know that I experienced limerence towards them. I think you can love someone, but also experience limerence toward them. That's why you have to kind of separate the two. Basically, you just have to be careful with limerence distorting your idea of what love is the whole point of what I'm trying to kind of bring light to you guys. because we're talking about limerence versus love and how to make sure that we're separating the two and we're understanding what it is that we're experiencing. That's why I wanted to make the series. That's why I wanted to go deep into, every shape and form of how we could be experiencing limerence in our lives, right? To end this video, what I will say is a good way to make sure that you really understand whether you're experiencing limerence versus love is you need to just strip completely the whole. I think on the first video I said make a literal line, T-chart, whatever you want to call it. Write fantasy, then you need to write reality. And I really think that we need to make a list of those two things and make sure we're grounded in reality and we're grounded in what we're actually getting in front of us and not what we want to get, not what we think we should get, not what we hope to get, but what are we getting and what is actually in front of us is what we need to focus on. And so we need to strip fantasy, attraction, and the attention, the validation, the obsession, and the imagined future that you possibly have in order to pursue someone or to be in a relationship with somebody, or to be with someone that you're just simply interested in and you really want to be with them, right? We need to strip all of those things and ground ourselves with the reality and ask what is actually left. What is left here, and do I genuinely know and love this person to honestly build a relationship off of what is left here? And if we cannot build something off of what's left there probably was never, a chance for this relationship to go anywhere. And so that's why we should make the decision to ultimately say, oh, this is absolutely limerence and I should probably just let this person go and move on with my life. Versus, if you are actually in love with them and, you genuinely do want to be with them, and, the reality of what's in front of you is something that can be built, on, then you can pursue that person and that person can pursue you in the same way. I just want to emphasize on limerence is very much like, it's almost like you have all these things that you could get, but you can't get it. It's kind of like that. You imagine this whole entire future with someone that you could possibly have, but you can't have it. So are you going to ignore the whole entire reality of how you can't get that and just go for it because you just want to, and it's making you feel good and it's filling a void inside you that you don't want the Lord to fill? Or are you gonna face the reality and say, this is limerence, I hate that I feel like this, but this is the reality of the matter and I just need to move on with my life? And so you have to be strong. I think you can absolutely overcome it, and that's what we're going to talk about next week. So make sure you stay tuned to, watch next week's video on how to overcome limerence. But today I just wanted to talk about, just the science and how you could possibly be experiencing it in your own life. And I hope that you guys got, a good idea of how to identify it in your own life. I hope you enjoyed this video, but just know that you can absolutely overcome it, and it's not the end of the world that you're experiencing this now. In fact, many of us are experiencing this and we don't even know that we are. So the fact that you are aware and you're kind of annoyed that this is what's going on, you can now overcome it, and there are ways to do that. I just think it's very important to know what limerence is first, because it actually is a thing. It is a thing. I didn't know it was a thing. I didn't even know it was a word that existed in the dictionary. I didn't even know that. And then get a good idea of what love is. A good way to do this is go to the Bible, read the Bible on love, okay? God himself is love. So, that's a good place to start. If you understand who God is and you read the Bible on what love and what a healthy relationship should look like, you'll get a good idea of what you should be expecting. And so with that being said, those things are very important to understand, and then we need to know why we're experiencing it to then identify it in our own lives to then overcome it, right? And so far we've covered all three, and the last one will be next week, so don't miss it. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, all of that fun stuff. I love you guys, and I will see you next week. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a great day.